What's going on, y'all? KMBest here. Let's talk about some top decks from top players in day one of this new metagame. One of the big things that changed with the upcoming metagame, or I should say the metagame we're currently in, is that a lot of decks got a lot more hurt by the Mother Askani change than I think many people expected. I have seen and tried some Gambit stuff. It does not feel like we know exactly what to do there in that space anymore, and it definitely feels like it needs a lot more help now that Mother Askani isn't cheating as much energy as she previously was. The deck feels much more fair, and when Gambit is on the fall, well, that's a very good thing for Batroc. Batroc is an extremely powerful mid-range deck that does extremely powerful mid-range stuff. Because I have such respect for Batroc, this is a list that has a Mercury in it, because frankly, the mirrors are pretty concerning if you don't have this. Otherwise, you're just waiting on who drew your scalers, and that is an awkward situation to put yourself in. What I like about this list is that it's basically mimicking the Many Men Multiple list. This list came from Iris, and I think it does some really cool stuff, but this and the Many Men list are gonna fight it out. That said, I do think that in a move-on-move angle, the one that is able to play Mercury is likely to end up advantaged, but the output of the Multiple Man list is still a little bit higher. This is where I would start for anyone looking for a safe, good deck to play. Something in the Batroc shape. They all seem pretty good right now. From Ika, a deck that I quite enjoy because it uses Supergiant a bit differently from how Supergiant decks typically do. There are many more games in a Supergiant Afflict deck that you're actually going to be throwing priority into Supergiant and making sure that your Hazmat hits as many things as possible. That's pretty cool, and it's definitely going to be something that you're going to have to think about when you play a deck like this. Largely, the big takeaway so far on day one from the games I've played is the power level of the game is significantly lower, and since the power level of the game is significantly lower, a lot of strategies that were previously not necessarily in high demand are running around and doing some real stuff. And I think that this is one of those spaces that hasn't been explored previously and might be worth exploring. I wouldn't be surprised if our eventual conclusion was that we wanted to end up back more close to a different kind of this Supergiant strategy, one that is more all in on taking priority. Maybe we're still doing Ozymandias stuff. I wouldn't be surprised if that was good as well. But I did want to highlight this because I do think it's a nice change of pace from the typical Supergiant gameplay. Aurora is just a really safe deck. I have two Aurora lists here, one with Luke Cage, one without. The reason I like the one that doesn't play Luke Cage a little bit more right now is because I haven't figured out exactly what the package for the Luke Cage stuff is just yet, but this was a pretty successful list for me just before the patch, and it is still just as good. We just talked about how the ceiling is a little bit lower than it used to be. Aurora is a deck that doesn't necessarily have the ability to reach ceilings. And so when ceilings get lowered, when you aren't running into people doing Carter combo nearly as much, you end up in a much more beneficial position as an Aurora gamer. That's sort of where this list comes in. It's just solid, safe. I feel the exact same way about this that I do about Batroc. My only worry for it long term is that Multiple Man and Batroc both sort of get to Big Brother it, and we don't have a ton of ways to interact with them meaningfully. We do have a Cosmic Ghost Rider. We do have a Mercury. That's why we're playing those cards. We wouldn't be if I wasn't scared of those matchups. For the record, replace them with Thing First Steps, replace them with Drax if you're not seeing those matchups. But those matchups are scary enough that I think we're kind of hard teching for them because I feel pretty good about everything else I do. Avrora, aka Anti-Venom Aurora. I gotta tell you, I had an absolute blunder of blunders when playing this list, so I'm just gonna tell you now. I lost the game because I forgot that Luke Cage only affected the front row. That is a thing that might happen to you when you are playing this. To quote J-Rock from Trailer Park Boys, it could happen to you because it happened to me. Lost 8 cubes thinking I would get 6 power back on my Cosmic Ghost Rider. That did not happen. It was quite bad. And that gives us a bit of pause, I think, where it's like, I don't actually know how much of an upgrade this is because the cards I had to cut to actually make it make sense, right? Like, I like having this stuff in here, but I also think that, like, now that Venus is in the deck, I feel way better about having awesome Andy compared to Mysterio, right? Like, that was actually a much harder cut to make. And figuring out what cuts I'm actually supposed to be making here it was actually pretty difficult. Do I want Man-Thing too? I don't think so, but I love power. And part of me is wondering if it might be a divergence point for Aurora, where there are going to be Aurora decks that are doing the Luke Cage stuff, and then there's going to be Aurora decks that are doing the Venus stuff. And I'm not sure you can support both of them. I'm really not. And I'm interested to see how this archetype evolves in the future. Maybe we're just supposed to cut CGR entirely. I really don't know, but I didn't like that I had to cut the Mercury, right? Like, I have 2 real tech slots in the other list, and I don't have them in this list. And so, as much as I think there's probably something here, I just haven't gotten there yet, and I think it's probably safer to play the first one. I've kind of seen a lot of bounce recently, like especially since the patch. People have been like, wait, does this make my Boomerang bounce deck a little bit better? The Boomerang change and the Silver Sable no longer hitting skills thing feels like it may have significantly upgraded what this deck can do. Now, I'm putting this one on here, but frankly, there's all sorts of flavors of bounce. There is Joaquin Torres Hitmonkey bounce. There is Joaquin Torres Wing Beat, Sholau, and Sasquatch bounce. There are a bunch of versions of this deck that you can play. We're just going to cover it as an archetype bounce. This might be the best time to play bounce that we have had in an extended period of time in Marvel Snap. There is not a guaranteed Gambit that is beating your ass anymore. The decks that were going over the top ceiling-wise are not necessarily there, and bounce is really good in mid-rangey metagames where it can just do points a little bit better than everything else. I think the easiest way to think about bounce is as the smallest combo deck. Typically what it tries to do is it's the smallest combo deck, combo in quotes here, that also dodges the most interaction. If you think of combo decks, meaning like not mid-range decks here, on a scale of dodging interaction to output, it's at the bottom of the output scale and near the top of the dodging interaction scale. This is true only as long as Gambit, Horseman of Death, stays dead, who is a huge problem for archetypes like this. But currently, I'm not really seeing a lot of him, and when I played him, he felt fine, I guess. I think that this is a good time to actually get some reps in on bounce. I'm not saying it's going to stick around for a long period of time. What I'm actually saying is I think eventually we'll figure out what a deck that out-ceilings bounce is, and bounce will go back to the sort of, dustbin of history. So if you're a bounce player playing right now, that seems like a thing you want to do. Jaywalla's been tuning this list for a while, a Thanos techno-organic virus list that is just built on doing things that people don't really expect in ways people don't really expect. I think of this list as a bit of a cousin of the Lady Bullseye Mother Askani Wong Ramatut deck. It's a little bit more straightforward, but it is kind of in that space of just like, I've never played against this before, they're cheating a ton of energy, and I don't know if I'm going to win or lose here. But while that deck got really hurt by the loss of Mother Askani, as far as I can tell at least, I do think that this list is a little bit more able to maintain what Mother Askani is doing for you. There's a lot of cool stuff you can do here, a ton of energy cheat. This is the kind of deck that, like, there are some specific tech cards that'll put you in the dumpster, but it's been a long time since I've seen a Thanos list and thought I could actually play games with that. And this is the same concept as the bounce list that we talked about, where we're in a really open metagame right now. I'm playing all sorts of stuff. I'm losing to all sorts of stuff. I'm beating occasionally all sorts of stuff. I kind of think you can get away with a lot of pet decks. This is a good time, specifically right now, today, tomorrow, whatever, for pet decks. If any deck is going to make us feel bad about that statement, it is probably this one. I think the Many Men deck is a pretty clear contender for me for being the best deck in the game by some metric. I find it difficult to believe that it isn't. It feels incredibly powerful. I think it leverages a ton of really strong stuff, but if a bunch of people play a bunch of Batroc and there's a bunch of Mercury running around, this deck can absolutely get hated out of the metagame. This is a combo deck that relies heavily on sequencing and knowing your interactions. Powerful outcomes include having multiple movable gigantic spiders. That's a really powerful thing to be doing here. You have a lot of ability to stack buffs on your multiple men. When you stack buffs on your multiple men, things typically go well for you as long as you're able to move them. This is a deck that is trying to set the tone, be the ceiling play. It used to be a deck that had a slightly lower ceiling than the Carter combo decks and looked to disrupt them with things like Juggernaut. Now it might be a deck that has the highest ceiling in the game. I'm not saying it is, but it certainly feels like of the decks I've been playing recently, this is the one that has the highest potential output. It's also a deck that people are pretty aware of. I was doing a lot of I snap because my hand is good and my opponent realizes what's going on because they see a multiple man and they're like, well, if they're snapping that, I guess I have to leave. So there is some known quantity here too. But I do think that this is a pretty clear top contender. I've been messing around with this list that I got from Derek because I don't really have a compelling argument for what the buff deck is supposed to look like in the absence of Mother Askani. It was a big nerf. Like, losing Mother Askani took the top off that deck. It hurt it a lot more than I thought it would, to be completely honest with you. We're now in a situation where I think maybe the best three you can possibly get is Hope Summers. You're not full comboing nearly as much unless everything lines up perfectly, and you're just kind of doing a lot more awkward pass the buff stuff. I really wonder about trying to get Askani back in here, but I just don't know if I can. You're playing a much more mid-rangey, I brood absorbing man kind of game plan. It's not great. And that does leave you with a pretty awkward taste in your mouth, I would say. Like, there are definitely some things that you'd rather be doing than this, but unfortunately, this is sort of where we're at. There is also, of course, another version of a buff deck that plays a bunch of 3 costs, though, and I have seen a decent amount of those as well. The Surfer lists are some amount of compelling. Like, I like what's going on there. They're much more in range. You're getting much less big brothered by stuff. I kind of think the overarching message of this is that the overall points in this metagame have severely gone down. Looks like we're heading back into a mid-range metagame unless someone can figure out a combo deck that just beats all this stuff is sort of the direction I'm headed. And the two sort of top of mid-range decks look like Batroc. They look like maybe the multiple man deck, just some things that died of Mercury, right? And so you end up with a metagame that looks primed to move. This kind of stuff is what I mean. Like, there's just not nearly as many points in the metagame as there were previously. Askani was juicing the metagame pretty high, and I think we're really seeing, like, not like, oh my god, interaction is back, but it does mean something that what's happening here is a bunch of people are jamming Juggernaut in their decks. It means that Juggernaut is actually winning lanes, which means that you're within 5 points of those lanes. And that is not how it used to be. We had better things to be doing than Juggernaut previously, and now it's like, okay, let's see how this goes. But I am very compelled by this kind of shape right now because the power level of the metagame feels so low. It's so much more acceptable to be doing something like this when your opponent isn't playing Captain Carter combo or 4 Sasquatches. It's just a much more normal level of power output that's happening here, and the V-Hand decks cannot output power meaningfully anymore. Like, they are much weaker decks than they previously were. The Captain Carter decks are just, like, in a totally different space. I think that some stuff is happening here. It's really interesting. Sorry, this video was a little bit late. Unfortunately, I just, like, lost track of time playing Marvel Snap a bunch, but my bad. Sometimes I, like, just do that, and I don't know. It's gonna be like, the video's gonna be like an hour late. I'm sorry.